Welcome to Hall & Estates and Succession Planning, a series of podcasts hosted by Ian Hall and Susanna Popovic-Montag. The podcast you are listening to will provide information and insights into estate planning in Canada. From the offices of Hull & Hull in Toronto, here are Ian and Susanna.
Hi, and welcome to Hull & Estates and Succession Planning. You're watching and possibly listening to episode 201. Well, welcome back. I apologize. We've been remiss on a couple of weeks now on getting a podcast out, but we're back online here. Susanna, as you can see, is not here this week, but part of the reason we wanted to get back online was because we've been so embarking on so many different projects in respect of our practice, but more importantly, with respect to some speaking we've been doing. I personally just got back from Ottawa, spent a couple of days up at the CALU conference, the Canadian Association of Life Underwriters, and myself, Deb Stevens, and Paul Gibney lectured or spoke at a workshop last week. Fascinating workshop, and it's an interesting conference because they had some great speakers for the life insurance agents to listen to, including the Prime Minister of Canada. The topic we discussed, though, was one about estate litigation and avoiding estate litigation and the role and the special role that an advisor can play in that process. And we had some really interesting feedback from these advisors who are selling, obviously, life insurance, but also our financial advisors. And so we had a broad spectrum of input from our discussions and some of the topics that we put forward. So fresh off of that, we've wanted to move on to a topic. We know we've been doing some charitable giving podcasts. We wanted to shift a little away. Without Susanna here, I'm going to take a run at my own attempts here to deal with a little different topic, because this is one that came out of the CALU conference as one is really was front and center with the group of advisors, and that is the whole question of tax planning. Now, as we've always say in our podcast and always to our clients, we're not a firm of tax experts, but what we are is a firm who see tax issues interwoven into the estate planning on a daily, sometimes minute-by-minute basis. So we wanted to step back and look at some issues relating to Canadian domestic tax planning. And let's just talk about the main categories. The first one is, of course, capital gains tax and some of the unique characteristics of capital gains taxing in Ontario and in Canada. Second one is the use of an estate freeze as a domestic tax planning tool. The third issue is dealing with tax planning in the context of an estate or a sale of a business, and that is succession planning at its best. Either it's during your lifetime or it's after death, and what are some of the tax nuances there that we have to be alerted to. And that ties into, of course, our fourth one, which is just family succession generally and the kind of domestic tax issues that we face. At the conference, there was a great discussion by Paul Gibney of Thorstensons, who he talked about the use of trusts and some of the unique skills that we have to be mindful of when using trusts and tax issues that relate to that. Obviously, at a CALU conference, we talked about the use of insurance and some of the creative tools that it brings with it. We talked about really helpful use of an annuity or using whole life and what they call T100 policies to give us some extra protections. So. And let's just start with that one, and we'll kind of work backwards, because it was fresh in my mind in terms of how we were dealing with the tax issues. One of the things that we've noticed is that trust law, and we've talked many times in this podcast, create an interesting trust option, gives you tax options, gives you control options. And the classic scenario, of course, is take some capital, put it into a trust, either on your death or during your lifetime into a inter vivos trust, and then let that capital grow and feed off interest off that to have a certain part of the beneficiaries, such as, for example, a wife or children, enjoy the interest only, and then the grandchildren would enjoy the capital. That's an easy scenario. And at the conference, what we explored was an option of how do we deal with the fact that the income beneficiaries, those who are getting the interest income out of the trust, are always at odds with those who want to get the capital at the end of the day. And at the conference, it was really handy because we had a true capital beneficiary there, and that was Deborah Stevens, who's the children's lawyer. And she will typically represent those grandchildren, or those minor children, who are going to receive the capital in her practice. So it was a great dialogue between us. And we talked about some of the problems with the trust structure, tax-wise, and just probably from process standpoint. And we talked about an insurance solution, an interesting solution that may work for some people. So I wanted to just talk through that a little bit today, and probably into our next podcast, because it has some interesting nuances. But let's just, if we step back in the illustration, just to set the stage, is we have a classic trust, as I say, income being established, the capital, let's say $100 million, or that's too high probably. Let's just say $1 million goes into a trust. A person puts it into a trust, and the interest income off that is going to feed the surviving wife or some of the kids, help them get through school and so on. And the capital, that $1 million, is going to go to your great-grandchildren or your grandchildren. So we've got kids who are going to enjoy some of the income, a wife that's going to enjoy some of the income, but the capital is going to go to the grandchildren. The tension in that trust arrangement has been talked about a little bit in podcasts before, but I want to flush through that a little bit, because that tension with the solution overlaid on the insurance solution was just something that was worth considering. And I'll just come to the solution and we'll talk about how we arrived at it. The solution was simply buy an insurance policy an annuity that will pay out the interest income on the life of the wife and the spouse. And it would be, depending on the type of annuity policy you would have, you would at least guarantee that that person would enjoy a lifetime of interest at a fixed amount. And overlay on top of that, because that's only solving the interest income group, that's what we call the income beneficiaries. How do we solve the fact that we want to leave a legacy for our grandchildren in our scenario? And the way that the proposal was, the idea was thrown on the table was buy a life insurance policy, a whole life insurance policy, or a T to 100 policy on your life, so that on your death you have managed to leave that legacy as well. So you're buying an annuity, and you're buying a life insurance policy. And we know that this can be funded because the person involved here has already decided that they want to put $1 million aside for the benefit of others. And in this case, during lifetime, or for on your death, because of the capital beneficiaries. It was an interesting idea, and one that really simple idea. We've still got a pool of money, and say we could just, for rough numbers, take half of it and buy the annuity, and take the other half and buy an insurance policy. You actually don't have to go work that high. You can probably use less to buy the insurance policy and get enough bang for your buck, and use the rest to buy the annuity. But it's the same starting point, and that is, this individual has $1 million. How do I look after 3 groups of people? My wife, my children, and their children. And this creative solution was put on the table and was talked through with some vim and vigor. Obviously, at an insurance conference, the insurance products are used or are considered much more intensely, but it was a really interesting tool to get around the tensions. And those tensions we're going to talk about in our next podcast, in terms of the battle between the income beneficiaries and the capital beneficiaries, and is that battle worth it? So thank you very much for joining us. Again, apologize for a little delay in getting these uploaded, but we're back and rolling, and I look forward to our next podcast. Thanks very much.
You have been listening to Hull & Estates and Succession Planning by Ian Hall and Susanna Popovic-Montag. The podcast that you've been listening to has been provided as an information service. It is a summary of current issues in estates and estate planning. It is not legal advice, and you're reminded to always speak with a legal professional regarding your specific circumstance. To listen to other Hull & Hall podcasts or leave any questions or comments, please visit our website at hullestatemediation.com.